Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. So we are pausing our summer farm tour series for a week because the next video is a goodie and we wanted to take a little extra time to get it together. But in the meantime, I thought I'd bust out a timely little video for you about crops that do well for fresh harvest over the winter, which may even contain a few crops you hadn't considered, like tomatoes. Okay, those aren't in there, but there are some good ones that maybe you hadn't thought about or maybe didn't realize you could grow. Also, I'm going to sprinkle in some important general winter growing tips throughout, so let's do it. All right, some quick but obligatory caveats for this particular video. Every region is going to be different. If you're in a very cold region like Zone 5 or colder, it may be hard to get some of these to maturity without a decent high tunnel, and you may already have needed to start some of these crops by now. If you're in a tropical zone like Florida, the winter is your main growing season, and yes, we are all a little bit jealous. Caveat number 2, the more infrastructure that you have, the better off these crops will all be. Even if that infrastructure is some hoops and some row cover, you could get certain crops like spinach well into the winter right there in the field. Now, harvesting can be tricky with frozen row cover, but you just have to wait until it unfreezes midday or just time your harvests based on the weather. Personally, as someone who does this professionally, but also likes his fresh veggies in the winter, I like my Rimmel high tunnel. I like my Farmer's Friend cat tunnels, which Rimmel is helping me to convert to permanent tunnels, and I'll discuss all that later. Those pieces of infrastructure, though, both help tremendously. If you're going to invest in one part of your farm, make it season extension. It will pay for itself extremely fast. Though for smaller farms or backyards or farms that have no real interest in winter farming but really do like winter produce, something like a cold frame, as Elliot Coleman describes in the Winter Grower's Handbook, could be easily constructed and at very least give your family some good fresh vegetables all winter long. I'll link that book in the show notes, but more on infrastructure in a later video. For now, let's get to the goods, or foods. Let's start with spinach, since I already mentioned it, and in fact, have done an entire video on it, which you can watch here, or there. But spinach is exceedingly hardy, depending on the variety. I find the Savoy types, the curly, wrinkly ones, to handle the winter very well, presumably for their low moisture content. The higher the moisture content in a leaf, the easier it is for the cold weather to burst the cell walls, thus slowly breaking down the integrity and rendering it mush. But by and large, spinach is just gonna spinach. It's a crop that needs just a small amount of covering and can be picked from all winter until the spring, when it will bolt. The spinach we grow in the field now, we will still be harvesting from in March, but we don't have months of snowpack here in Kentucky, so take that as you will. Next, lettuce. We get more requests from customers for lettuce than anything else that we grow in the winter. There are several varieties that do extremely well through the cold, although most lettuce will do fairly well, but there are some varieties that do really, really well in the winter with just a small amount of covering. Winter Density is one. The Salanova types are good. Cherokee Red Romaine is another. I like Muir, literally year-round. That variety is a beast. Like with all winter crops, get the lettuces in as early as possible or as close to like September 15th, October 1st, in between that period. As I always say, the idea is not that it's winter growing so much as it's winter just keeping stuff alive. Grow whatever crop it is to maturity and then keep it as protected as possible. A really important rule that we use for lettuce and most other leafy greens in the tunnel is that if the forecast is calling for below 25 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees Celsius, we will cover them with an extra layer of row cover. Down to that temperature, we leave most stuff uncovered overnight. You would be amazed at how much cold most crops can take, especially after they are acclimated or hardened off. In fact, we leave the sides of the tunnel up on our first frosty nights to kick those winter crops into gear and get them to get on their proverbial winter coats. Remember, when using row cover, to never let the row cover touch the crop. Any part of the plant where the row cover is touching will turn black and get damaged. It's like the opposite of the Midas touch. That's how I remember it. Actually, that just came up with that. I don't remember anything. All right, let's talk kale. For us, we want to get stuff in the tunnel by October 15th. That's our cutoff in the high tunnels, and in the field most crops have to be planted by latest October 1st, which is still kind of pushing it even in our region of Kentucky, Zone 6B. Anyway, there are varieties of kale like Winter Boar that are built to handle the cold and under the right protection can last you all the way until the spring. Though I do recommend at least one more midwinter planting of kale if you have the space. Chard is similar, but it's a little less hardy than kale. We find the green-stemmed varieties are often more winter-tolerant than the red-stemmed varieties, but ironically, less interesting to our customers. So honestly, we've kind of stopped bothering with much winter chard as a market item, but for your own eats, it's deliciously sweet in the winter, and maybe you can find chefs or customers who are down with the green and white stems as opposed to the red ones. But again, get that crop in as early as you possibly can, and it will definitely need some protection. Arugula is a nice cold hardy green that you can, hi kitty cat, I know, I'll see you later, that you can get a few cuttings off of throughout the winter. If in a tunnel, don't sow it quite as densely as you would in the field unless you have really excellent airflow. Airflow is key with all of these crops. I open the sides of our tunnel practically every day as long as it is sunny, and just to allow for some amount of airflow to the plants. If you want to know what fungal disease wants for its birthday, it's a closed high tunnel full of leafy greens in the winter. I like Astro Arugula all year, but we haven't tried some of the others out there. If you have any varieties of any of these crops that you love for the winter, make sure to put them in the comment section. And then make sure to read the comment section so you may find some others. Carrots are actually an interesting crop, not just for winter storage. I'm not going to talk much about storage crops here, but for actual winter growing. We often plant around in the tunnel in late September or early October for January and February harvests. The carrots are often slightly paler in color, but absolutely the sweetest things in the world. I don't so much do that in the field because harvesting root crops out of frozen ground is no longer my idea of a good time. Some folks will grow late summer carrots though, and then cover them with a thick layer of hay or straw and then harvest those as needed out of the field. We usually grow them in the summer, harvest them in the fall, and then store them, or like this, we plant them in early October for January harvests, and then sow them again in January for April harvests. Typically, our varieties of choice are Mokum and Napoli on carrots, but most any carrots will do well here. I like Mokum and Napoli just because they're fast growers. Now, two crops you may not have had on your list, parsley and cilantro. Cilantro ironically loathes the summertime and will easily bolt. We in fact grow our cilantro now in the summer similarly to how we grow our lettuce in the summer, which you can watch this video here for a breakdown on that. But in the winter, cilantro is king. We will plant it on its own. We will also add it to cover crops. Anywhere we can find some space, we throw a little cilantro. Parsley is another great one, but the challenge with parsley is that it's slower than molasses, so you would have to likely have started it already or started it in the summer. If you want to start it now, you will have it maybe in late winter, but ideally parsley is transplanted in the late summer or early fall so that you can pick from it all through the cold months. It's worth having though. Having just that small touch of greens for dishes in the winter feels like cheating. Like I'm fresh herbs on everything years old. That's how I think about it. Protect both of these herbs with row cover if you can. And if you need help knowing how to buy row cover, consult the row cover growing guide I did this video. One thing that we've been doing this fall is sowing pea shoots really densely into open beds as a cover crop, and then we will harvest the shoots from those for a couple of weeks. In fact, spinach, kale, mustard greens, turnips, arugula, and pea shoots can all make excellent winter ground cover that you can also harvest from. We aren't replacing our cover cropping for these crops necessarily, but harvestable winter crops like these are certainly becoming a bigger part of our winter growing, and they kind of stand in for cover crops. And I'm talking specifically in the field. In the tunnels, we are much more specific. Out in the field where we have a little bit more room, we can play. The soil is always going to be better off if something is growing there. May as well be delicious. Okay, so some honorable mentions that you can play with. There are some great flowering broccoli that can handle the winter. We grew some beautiful Hansai one year that was delicious and took mini frosts in the field and just kept flowering. Not an easy one to sell, but an easy one to eat. Claytonia, Minutina, and Mosh are all very hardy winter greens. I love those flavors as well. The Mosh, you do not get a second cutting from. It's really just kind of like a sort of like a micro head of lettuce, but delicious, quite refreshing. Obviously, chickweed is one that grows for free, sometimes admittedly wherever it wants, but it's very winter hardy, full of nutrients. Again, very similarly refreshing. And there are some cultivated varieties of chickweed out there, presumably bred by some delightful lunatics. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. And if it was, consider picking up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook from no-tillgrowers.com to support these videos, or a hat, or other merch. Become a sustaining supporter by joining our Patreon page at patreon.com/no-till-growers, or just hit that super thanks button. That works too. Remember that we also have a whole podcast dedicated to winter production hosted by the great Clara Coleman, so give that a listen as well if you're interested in more technique and how different people do it in different regions. Otherwise, like this video if you like this video. If you are not subscribed to this channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you are subscribed, you're awesome. Thanks for watching. We'll see you later. Bye. The winter's coming, kitty cat. You ready?